Good day, everyone. Today, I'm going to present to you a very interesting and relatable topic about threats to biodiversity. What do you think are the threats to biodiversity today? The loss of biodiversity around the world has many causes. Unfortunately, over the past 100 years, biodiversity has decreased significantly. This causes the number of healthy places for animals and plants to live to shrink. Today, plants and animals face many threats including climate change, pollution, overexploitation, habitat loss and fragmentation, invasive species. In today's discussion, I'll be discussing all these threats. Let's get started. Number 1, we have climate change. It is often in the news. Scientists are very concerned about the effects climate change is having on the planet and its biodiversity. During the Earth's 4.5 billion year history, the climate has changed many times, from ice ages to periods when the Earth's climate was mostly tropical. The problem today, though, is that the rate of climate change is too fast, and it's the result of human activity. One cause of climate change is the burning of fossil fuels. Because we humans, we want energy to drive our cars, power our transportation, heat and cool homes, produce electricity, run factories, and a lot more. And in our modern world, most of the energy comes from the burning of fossil fuels. However, these fuels emit gases as they are burnt. And that gases are what we call as greenhouse gases, which actually traps heat from the sun's rays inside the atmosphere, causing the Earth's average temperature to rise. And that rise in the planet's temperature is what we call as the global warming. Another cause of the rising carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere is deforestation. Trees and plants naturally capture and store carbon, and the removal of trees has reduced the amount of carbon being taken out of the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have varied over geologic time, and some carbon dioxide is necessary to keep our planet warm. However, today the levels are at an all-time high, and because of this, scientists predict that in the 21st century, the average temperature around the globe will rise between 2 and 5.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And that rise in temperature may not seem like a lot. It might even sound nice to have warmer days, right? But think about it like this. You have on a hoodie and jeans and maybe a hat too. You are comfortable, not feeling too hot, not too cold. Then suddenly someone cranks up the heat. You are sweating and shedding layers. Or you move to another room that's cooler, or open a window to cool the room back down. As a human, we are able to adapt quickly. But what about other species? What do you think? Will they be able to adapt quickly? Not so much. Trees in the rainforests of South America, for example, they are gradually growing further uphill to stay in a climate they are adapted to. But the change is happening too fast for them to keep up. Another impact of global warming is melting polar ice. The melting of sea ice will disrupt many polar species, which includes these polar bears. They actually depend on the ice for hunting. And in addition, as the ice melts, sea levels will rise, flooding many island and coastal habitats. And these areas will simply be underwater, putting all species in these locations at risk. And even tigers, they are actually one of those species that stand to lose almost of their breeding grounds as sea level rise. Another result of climate change is hotter temperatures, which can actually threaten the survival of the African wild dog pups. They are actually heat sensitive. I have here an article about the African wild dogs and climate change and how are these dogs directly and indirectly threatened by climate change. Threats due to climate change. Rising temperatures mean shrinking water supplies, which affects many different species including us, humans. Weather patterns are also changing too, causing more extreme weather events in many parts of the world. Increased carbon dioxide levels affect marine life as well. The ocean naturally absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere where it dissolves, and in the process, chemical reaction turn the carbon dioxide into an acid. But with more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, more carbon dioxide is being absorbed by the oceans. And our oceans are becoming too acidic. And because of this ocean acidification, which is the process by which the ocean absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and through a series of chemical reactions, which becomes more acidic. Many shelled marine species cannot produce hard, healthy shells because of this ocean acidification. Species such as clams, oysters, and mussels are also threatened. And at the same time, coral reefs, they are also threatened. Corals are actually animals that together form a community called reef. Ocean acidification is causing coral growth to slow and the coral skeletons are weaker. And without healthy skeletons and shells, many species, including coral, are more vulnerable to predators and erosion. Coral reefs are also affected by higher water temperatures, which cause a loss of microscopic algae, which is the main food source of the coral. And it actually results to what we call as coral bleaching, which is a sign of poor health in coral that happens when the algae in the coral die or lose their color, just like what you are seeing on screen. On the left is a healthy coral and on the right is a bleached coral. The Earth has already seen a steady decline in the number of healthy coral reefs, and if they disappear, the many marine species that depend on coral reefs for food and shelter may also disappear. So we need to think about how climate change actually threatens these species. Before moving on to the next threats to biodiversity, I have here a QR code. You can pause the video for a while and scan it. So this is a TED Ed video about changing climate. There are videos about renewable energy, buildup of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, animals' ability to adapt to climate change, human impacts on the geologic record, and more. So you can check that out. Another threat to biodiversity is pollution. And when you think about the word pollution, what comes to your mind? Well, perhaps we might think of piles of litter along a street, or maybe a brown or black or gray cloud spewing out of the smokestack of a factory, or maybe an oil spill in the ocean. These are just a few examples of the many types of pollution that result from human activity, and each one of them affects biodiversity. Well, pollution is any material or substance that comes from the environment. Pollution is any material or substance that comes into an environment and is poisonous or can cause harm. Similar to litter, smoke, and oil spills, many types of pollutions are easy to see. But many serious pollution threats to biodiversity cannot be seen. Let's say the fertilizers and the pesticides we used in the agriculture, they are also a threat to biodiversity. And they are actually gaining a lot of attention. Pesticides do a great job of getting rid of pests, but on the other hand, they also kill other insects as well as beneficial microbes in the soil. Then, the harmful chemicals make their way into the soil and the water, affecting fish and other organisms. And while some fertilizers and animal waste are not directly toxic, they are full of nutrients that upset the balance of nearby and downstream habitats. And nitrogen fertilizers have caused many dead zones in the Earth's oceans and water resources. And if we talk about dead zones, what is it? What is a dead zone? It is actually an area where nitrogen has created an overgrowth of algae or an algae bloom. So if you talk about an algae bloom or an algal bloom, it is a rapid increase in the population of algae. When we talk about algal bloom, it is a rapid increase in the population of algae in an aquatic system. Some algal blooms are the result of an excess nutrients, particularly phosphorus and nitrogen, into waters, and higher concentrations of these nutrients in water cause increased growth of algae and green plants. Well, some of them are toxic, killing fish and marine birds and mammals. Whether they are directly toxic or not, when the algae die and decompose, the process takes up all the oxygen in the surrounding water, and with little or no oxygen, most marine life cannot survive. And the Earth's oceans have growing numbers of dead zones, and one of the largest forms every spring along the Gulf of Mexico in the southern US as a result of fertilizer runoff from farms far upstream in the Missouri and Mississippi watersheds. And another source of pollution that goes unnoticed, especially in the ocean, is plastic trash. Have you ever thought about this? Plastic has become a big part of our lives. And much of the plastic produced, however, is single-use plastic. That means we use it once and throw it away. Think about the plastic bottles, the bags, the utensils we use every day. Unfortunately, only a small amount of percentage of plastic gets recycled. The rest ends up in landfill or makes its way into the ocean or into seas, just like what you are seeing here on screen. Even worse, plastic never decomposes. And as time passes, it does break down into smaller and smaller pieces we call microplastics. But it never fully goes away. And this has become an enormous problem for marine life. And the problem is so bad that huge garbage patches have formed into the world's oceans. And these patches are places where ocean currents bring the trash together in gigantic swirls that cover millions of square miles. Does this look like a jellyfish to you? Here, the one at the middle, the picture at the middle? Well, it does to a sea turtle. The issue of plastic trash in the ocean affects more than 700 marine species. Actually, some species get tangled in discarding. Some species get tangled in discarded fishing nets. Others, such as sea turtles, eat the plastic by accident. Unfortunately, a plastic bag floating in the ocean looks a lot like a jellyfish, which is the turtle's favorite food. Another example, the Laysan albatross on the Midway Atoll in the North Pacific. They also mistake plastic trash for food. And sadly, they bring this plastic food back to their young. And on the atoll, the stomachs of dead birds are found to be full of plastic trash. And the birds starve to death with a full stomach. I have here another QR code for you to scan. So this actually talks about the life cycle of a plastic bottle, which is the leading sources of trash on Earth. And every minute, 1 million of these bottles are bought around the world, but less than 10% are recycled. So in this video, you will learn about the origin of the bottles and what happens when they aren't disposed of properly. And plastic pollution affects the entire food chain. And even if an organism ingests plastic and isn't harmed right away, the plastic itself is toxic. The toxins have effects on a species' reproduction, health, and survival skills. Then, when another species comes along and eats the first, they are taking in microplastics and toxic chemicals too. This happens all the way up to the food chain to the humans. And a study by the University in Belgium found that people who eat seafood regularly eat up to 11,000 bits of microplastic per year. Wow! Are you still going to eat seafood? Another threat to biodiversity is what we call as habitat loss and fragmentation. As the human population grows, more and more of the Earth's land surface is converted for human use. Some of this is for development, houses, grocery stores, cities, roads, and more. And much of it is for agricultural uses to feed growing population. And every time land is converted for human use, other species are killed or pushed out. Can you imagine a bear knocking on your door and saying, "Hey, get out? Time to move on." The bear moves into the kitchen, mountain lions make dens in the basement, and birds take over the attic, and you are out of home. How is that? When species lose their habitat, they must adapt or move. Well, what do you think will happen to them? Well, otherwise, they will die. Think about what might have lived on the very spot your home or school is on now. What was the native habitat? Well, habitat destruction has become the leading cause of biodiversity loss around the world. Can you imagine a world without orangutans in the wild? Orangutans are on the brink of extinction because their habitat in Indonesia and Malaysia is being cleared for palm oil production and agricultural uses. This type of deforestation is occurring around the world, including in the old-growth forest of the Pacific Northwest. And the deforestation results in the loss of 3 species as well as the plants and animals in that ecosystem. And as humans continue to convert land, we divide natural ecosystems into smaller and smaller pieces. And this is what we call fragmentation, which restricts species to living in smaller areas. And the fragments are cut off from other fragments and may not provide species with enough space to roam, eat, and find a mate. Another threat to biodiversity is overexploitation, which is the hunting or taking of a natural resource, such as animals or trees, faster than the population can reproduce, which often leads to extinction. Humans are hunting some species faster than those species can reproduce. Illegal wildlife trade is a type of overexploitation that occurs around the world. which is also called as poaching, which occurs when animals are hunted or captured even though they are protected. One example of that is the pangolins. They are actually scaly anteaters, which are one of these animals. They are actually killed for their scales. And in China and Vietnam, it is believed that these scales have medicinal value. Similarly, sharks are killed for their fins to make shark fin soup. And then, the demand for these shark fins are so great that many shark species are at risk for extinction, and as many as 100 million sharks are killed each year. Elephants, on the other hand, are killed for their ivory tusk. Rhinos are killed for their horns, and tigers are also killed for their furs. People who keep track of elephant population noted a 30% decline in African elephants between 2007 and 2014, and the fear is that if the poaching continues at that rate, these elephants will be extinct by the year 2040. Overexploitation affects many other species as well. People trade exotic birds as pets, and plants are illegally traded too. People commit these crimes because the demand is huge and the money is good. Yet, this wildlife trade is considered one of the greatest threats to endangered species. Sad to say. Another threat to biodiversity is what we call as invasive species. Another threat to biodiversity is invasive species. What are these invasive species? They are species that is not native to an ecosystem and rapidly expands to crowd out and harm other species. They can cause great economic and environmental harm to new area. To be invasive, a species must adapt to the new area easily. It must reproduce quickly, it must harm property, the economy, or the native plants and animals of the region. And many invasive species are introduced into a new region accidentally. Zebra mussels are native to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea in Central Asia. Zebra mussels arrive in the Great Lakes of North America accidentally. They stuck to large ships that travel between the two regions. And there are now so many zebra mussels in the Great Lakes that they have threatened the native mussels. On the other hand, if we talk about introduced species, they are brought to a new area on purpose. And often, these species are introduced as a form of pest control. Other times, introduced species are brought in as pets or decorative displays. People and businesses that import these species do not anticipate the consequences. Even scientists are not always sure how a species will adapt to a new environment. For example, in 1949, 5 cats were brought to Marion Island, a part of the South Africa in the southern Indian Ocean. The cats were introduced as pest control for mice, but by 1977, about 3,400 cats were living on the island, endangering the local bird population. How do we eradicate or remove these invasive species? We can make use of a variety of methods to try to get rid or eradicate these invasive species. For example, the cats on the Marion Island were infected with the virus. And sometimes, other species are introduced to help control an invasive species. And Lastly, governments are working to educate the public about invasive species. Another type of invasive species that is proving to be especially deadly is disease. Again, species evolve and adapt to their environment through time, but when a new disease is introduced, species do not have the defense to fight the disease. One example is the tree fungus that affects the amphibians. Humans have helped spread the fungus around the world through the wildlife trade, causing one of the largest wildlife extinctions ever seen. The fungus is responsible for the extinction of hundreds of species of frogs and other amphibians. More than any other species that has come before us, humans have had an enormous impact on Earth and on biodiversity. Technology has increased our ability to transform the planet to meet our needs. And as the human population continues to grow, so does our impact. In fact, as the human population increases, species diversity decreases. And by the year 2050, the human population on Earth is expected to reach 9 billion. And meanwhile, more than 23,000 species around the world are at risk for extinction, and that includes more than 40% of all amphibians, 33% of reef-building corals, and 13% of birds. What can we do to protect biodiversity on Earth? All around the world, people are working to protect Earth's biodiversity, and there are two important ways to protect biodiversity, which is actually through conservation and preservation. What's the difference between the two? Conservation is using natural resources responsibly. Conservation works to make sure that we don't run out of natural resources or cause a species to become extinct. Some conservation projects replace natural resources. Community groups may plant new native trees, and there's also captive breeding programs at zoos identifying endangered species. They raise species in zoos and then release them into safe habitats in the wild. And that is another critical step in the conservation process. Preservation, on the other hand, is the protection of plants and animals by setting aside and protecting natural habitats. It limits the use of these areas or organisms by people. Protected areas must be large enough to provide for the needs of the animals and plants that live there. And around the world, thousands of wilderness areas have been set up to protect plants, animals, and ecosystem. Protecting biodiversity is not easy. Experts are constantly working to balance protecting Earth's natural resources with the needs of people who depend on those resources. Preservation is not an easy or a quick task. It requires cooperation among many businesses, governments, and private landowners. So how can we help? How can we contribute? Well, protecting biodiversity is important for everyone. If each person makes an effort to protect biodiversity, little things can add up to a big change. And there are actually many ways on how we can help preserve and conserve biodiversity. Working together, we can preserve and protect biodiversity around the world, and that will mean a better future for all living things on Earth. Hopefully, we can take our part in this, in conserving and preserving biodiversity. To wrap up my discussion for today, I am inviting everyone to a quizzes game that I made. You can open it through joinmyquizzes.com and enter the code 58275754. I am looking forward to everyone's participation. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.